It was a rainy day in early August when we decided to go to the Black Brook Cemetery. This cemetery is well known in local lore as being a site of supernatural activity. Most prevalent is the story of the Black Brook Witch. As a folklorist and as a researcher, my job is not to prove if something is true or false. It's not to debunk anything. It's to ask why we tell these stories, where the stories come from, and why they're important to people, how they mark our connection to place and space, time, and the people before us. So, where does the story of the Black Brook Witch come from? Who was she? What can we learn from this story? Does her grave actually exist? These are the sorts of things that we had in our mind when we came here. In consulting with the Beaton Institute Archive, one of the largest archives in Atlantic Canada, located in Cape Breton, we found that there were no reports of the legend of the Black Brook Witch, which is highly unusual for a story that would be in the oral tradition. When talking to local people, especially younger people, they're very familiar with the story of the witch, and many of them recount tales of coming here looking for the witch herself or having interactions where they could hear the witch. It's very common for people to come legend tripping here, which is what we folklorists call it when people travel to the site of where a legend occurred, where there might be a haunted building, where there might be something that appears to people, and legend tripping is a big part of adolescent culture throughout North America. When talking with older people in the community, they don't seem to know the story of the Black Brook Witch unless they've heard it from a family member. So it seems like it didn't exist in the oral record until the past couple of decades. One question that leaves me with is, was it influenced by popular culture? If the story of this local witch was influenced by popular culture, it doesn't make it any less valid from a folklore perspective. What it does mean is that it was quite possibly influenced from the film The Blair Witch Project, a found footage style film that many people age 40 and under are familiar with. It's not uncommon for folk culture to be influenced by pop culture, and it's not uncommon for pop culture to be influenced by folk culture. We see a lot of movies about the supernatural that are drawn from local stories. And we also see a lot of times when popular culture films, such as The Blair Witch Project, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or even The Exorcist, have an uptake in reports of this type of paranormal activity. We don't know much about this particular witch, but we do know a lot about witches in general. Many women were thought to be witches if they performed in a way that wasn't accepted by their community. Women who practiced any kind of folk medicine, oftentimes women who were midwives, sometimes women who married into a community, women with mental health issues. These were all the sorts of women that were often flagged as being a witch or exhibiting properties basically that were not accepted in their community at large, and they were viewed as problematic women. Witches were often thought to have a knowledge of folk medicine. Sometimes witches were said to dance naked under the moon, or have seances with the devil, or have intimate relationships with the devil. They were said to be able to do things like turn milk from animals into blood. These are all the sorts of beliefs that were associated with witches. Witches were often believed to have a third nipple, and that's how they could be identified. Other times, people have probably heard or seen in popular culture the idea that women would be thrown into the water and see if they would sink or float, and this would help identify if someone was a witch. Women who were believed to be witches were often ostracized by their community. Some women were single, and that was part of why they were considered to be a witch. Other women were oftentimes part of another religion that was contrary to the community, or married into the community and were therefore seen as somewhat suspicious. Women who were witches were often stoned to death, burned to death. There is a specific grave that is believed to be the grave of the witch. Perhaps most notable about it is that it is the most unusual looking gravestone in the cemetery. Shaped like a stump and resting about 3 feet tall, it has a scroll down the front of it. This is the grave of Catherine Jane Hasty Appleton, wife of Captain Peter Agnew Appleton. At the time in which Catherine died, graveyards in Cape Breton were divided along religious lines. This is a Presbyterian graveyard, and Catherine was Anglican, which might explain why her grave is on the outskirt of the graveyard. Did we experience anything supernatural at the cemetery? Well, it's hard to say. but I did find it unusual that a rabbit crossed our paths and seemed to be very unbothered by us and actually sat there and watched us for some time. Some might say this is a witch's familiar. Do you have a story about the Black Brook Cemetery? If so, tell us about it in the comments. What I want to do is tell the spirit that she's free to leave this place. But I don't want to do that without some sort of protection for myself, so I've put silver on both my wrists and actually something from my grandmother and my mother. And if she is a witch, she probably has great respect for matrilineal power, female power, and so I hope that will protect me. And I also have a cross with Frida Kahlo on it, who's like well known for her suffering and devotion to religion, and again, just as a means of protection. So, what some people believe is that you give an offering of alcohol and tobacco, and one of the things, if you're talking about spirits, is that alcohol and tobacco have been around throughout the ages, and so it would be something that would be known to them. But I'm just going to tell her that, the pain of this world is gone and she doesn't need to protect anyone. Everyone that she loves is in the afterlife, and that she's free from this space.
Hello everybody, my name is Joseph Reed. You're here in my home, and I'm proud to say and feel very confident, and I'm looking so forward to being visible on the Birch Street Homestead YouTube channel next week. And there I'll be displaying some of my art and talking a little bit about myself, and we'll see you then.